And in the past couple of years, finally people are talking more about value of care in healthcare. Because if we continue to improve quality by simply adding another 45 auditors, or having 6 more checkers, or if the problem with our time is that we can't get a patient in their MRI, let's build 3 more MRI scanners. But when you look at how often the magnet is on, you find that it's only on 30% of the time, which means that 70% of the time in a 24-hour period, right, that magnet's just sitting there off because we're waiting for the anesthesia to kick in, or we're having an issue with getting the kid protocoled, or we're only using the $20 million machine from 9 to 5, right? Only in the United States, right? In the United States healthcare, not anywhere else in the United States would it be okay to buy a $20 million machine and use it for less than half of the day. By the way, it's not because patients don't want to come in at night. They absolutely want to come in at night. The parents would love to take their kids in and out. We've done the studies, right? They would be happy to take their kid in at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so, there's a different way of thinking. And one of the things that I look to is lean thinking, which is operations engineering. It's some Toyota process engineering dealing with cars. But they're basically looking at how do we make systems more responsive. And one of my hypotheses is that if, as doctors, we don't get involved in some of these systems, we get healthcare information systems that aren't designed to do what we need them to do. Placzek designs an ICU at John Muir that has no hope of actually providing ICU care, right? The point that I'm trying to make is that the people that are doing the work have to be involved in designing the systems around that care. And so the question is, why do we get to operations engineering? And I use a quote from Henry Ford, which said, you can have any car you want as long as it's black, right? And a Model T. And so, but we needed to develop systems where you could go from this to go to this because people wanted choice. And so when you have variation, you have to be able to accept that variation. Just like we have patients that are coming in with different diagnoses, we can't treat every patient the same. So what we need to do is control variability where it does not stem from our patients. So that what we're not worrying about is, did the patient actually get the albuterol that I ordered? How many times, Dr. Ross, are you going and checking and saying, well, this patient's not getting better? I wonder why they're not getting better. Is it because I have the wrong diagnosis? Seems like an asthmatic, right? Or is it because they're not getting the meds that we want, right? And so now you're looking, well, who ordered the meds? Let's look at this. Let's go through all of these various things. And you would spend a lot of energy on a system because there's the potential for it to fail. My question is, when are we going to design a way so that it can't possibly fail? I haven't figured it out yet. But I do want to know, when are we going to design a way, Dr. Ju, so that you can't walk into the room without having washed your hands? Right? Because good people forget to wash their hands. I did it the other week on rounds. I'm going in, I'm seeing a kid, we're in a double room, the kid's screaming, I look around, the big curtain's open, we have a whole, I go and I take the curtain, I close it, and I go to examine the patient. I shouldn't do that. That curtain might be contaminated, right? Now, was it the worst thing in the world? No. But nonetheless, right, how can we figure out a way that I don't have to do that? So, there's many principles of lean thinking, and when you want to apply them to healthcare. And I'll just quickly say that what you need to do is figure out what's valuable from the customer's perspective. And by that, I mean to say, we shouldn't figure out what's valuable for me, the attending, because if you design the system around me, even though you think that might be optimizing the scarce resource, in actual fact, the real cost of care is the patient sitting here in this building. And getting me to the next thing that I have to do is actually not where the real costs are in healthcare. What I need to do is finish my care for that patient. So well, maybe I can show you all this stuff. But I'll hold on there for a moment. But once you're able to figure out what's valuable, you have to figure out that stream, that set of processes that creates the value for the patient, find a way, and so that you don't have to be at the back of the process whipping it, saying, I need to get the patient into the 3 East. Instead, what you want is you want 3 East to have a bed, and you want them to go looking around and saying, are there any patients that fit our criteria that should be going to 3 East? That's a pull system, right? Where all of a sudden, now the system's working for you as opposed to against you, right? So, I don't know, when you're a resident, maybe in your college, now you might find you're doing a little bit of wood printing, right? That's maybe part of your job. By the way, once you're able to get from a push system to a pull system, you have to continuously improve it, right? Because the first time you design something, it's not going to do it. So, W. Edward Deming said we should work on our processes, not on the outcomes of our processes. And that is because of this simple equation. The outcome that you have is the result of certain processes. And a system that is designed, a system is perfectly designed for whatever it produces. So if you're having a lot of errors, your system is designed to create those errors. Extraordinarily rarely do you have saboteurs in a sense. Very, very rarely. Now, someone might not be as good as somebody else, But the system's allowing them to make those mistakes in general. Someone's not usually coming purposefully to do something harmful. It happens. There's news reports of it, right? And so the basic notion of how we do these cycles of improvements on all of these various processes is the PDCA or the PDSA cycle. You can't leave a performance improvement lecture unless you've heard these words before, right? It stands for Plan, Do, Study, Act, Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's the scientific method, right? Nothing different than the scientific method, except when you think about it in a management system and a cycle, what you're trying to do is do these improvements, right, which many of you have actually been part of in our hospital, and then implement some sort of standard, some sort of check, some sort of way that it becomes part of someone's work so it doesn't roll back downhill. And the issue is, skip that. The issue is that the majority of error proofing that we do in our systems are down here. By that I mean to say the customer is inspecting quality. Or the unit, the company's inspecting quality assurance at the end of the line. But what you want to do is have error proof that basically makes it so you can't make those errors. Let me give you a personal example. This is what I've been going through for the past week. My mother, who is 69, lives in Chicago, has been terrified of doctors her whole life, and finally I get her to go back and see one because she's been losing weight. I'm very afraid she has cancer. She's down to 80 pounds. She sees her internist, who's a private internist in private practice, and this was about 3 weeks ago, who's like, yeah, this is concerning, you need a bit of a workup. He orders a CT of her abdomen, in my mind I translate that to a CT of the abdomen and pelvis, and some basic labs. And she wants fasting labs. By the way, in case any of you practice adult medicine, for the past 5 years there hasn't been much indication for fasting labs in adult medicine because we have hemoglobin A1Cs, we don't need fasting glucoses anymore, and your LDL really isn't that effective method. We now know by what you've eaten, and we don't manage triglycerides, so there's not that much indication for fasting labs. Anyway, he ordered fasting labs. It was a Wednesday evening, and at his office, the lab place was closed. He has his own shingle, right? And so it's up to in his place, it's up to the patient to figure out where you get your labs done. And so my mom's like, okay, I guess I'll come next Monday. So she comes next Monday, wastes 2 hours to get labs done. And the guy's out of town. And so finally, last Friday, I call and I'm like, what are the results of these labs? I mean, what's going on? I got the HIPAA form, I got them to send them over to me. No doctor's seen them. My mom's bills are $980,000. So I'm like, Jesus, maybe she has myelodysplastic syndrome. She ends up getting that CT scan because she was complaining of some intermittent abdominal pain. This happened on Tuesday. And the CT scan shows, by the way, it was only of the abdomen and they didn't do the contrast because the person who was filling out the form, which wasn't the doctor, didn't fill it out right. And by the way, my dad had to figure out where to go get this thing done, right, because it's a private shingle guy, so he had to call up a radiology standalone shop and get this done. And she has a 12-centimeter complex cystic mass on her ovaries, or not her ovaries, in her abdomen. I think it's ovarian. And so I'm sitting there over here, right? Knowing, well, I have a lecture I have to give, right? That's the first thing actually really goes through my mind. The other thing, I'm like, how am I getting my mom and dad to see someone who's competent, right? Because when I call this doctor, he's like, oh no, we don't need to get a CA 125. I'm like, absolutely. He's like, you need tissue diagnosis. I'm like, you don't biopsy ovarian masses. Like, what's wrong with you? You're over your head. Get her in to see somebody, right? So I spent the majority of the day today getting her into Northwestern to get it into a gynecologic oncologist, a hematologist, and getting her into a PCP. Now, fortunately, none of these things have yet caused worse harm for my mom. I'm not sure things are going to work out okay. But this has been an ordeal for my family, mostly because they've had to work against the system, and they're trying to, they're like, and so basically every night my dad's been like, I don't know, should I go into the emergency department, right? And I asked myself, I've always been like, why do people just come into the emergency department? You need primary care. This is kind of the answer. And so the notion is none of these things are error-proof, right? There was just people doing their stuff, and you just get the 1 in 100 error rates. And when healthcare is very complex, they add up. What I'd like to see is instead of trying to make someone wait for 15 seconds, after they've done 15 seconds of scrubbing that hub, because we can't have any more line infections, figure out a way so that I don't have to try to force someone to do something that's almost impossible to force them to do. We're going to keep educating the heck out of people, right? By the way, if you're ever breaking into a line, please scrub the hub for 15 seconds, and then wait for 15 seconds for it to dry. Because we don't want someone to get a line infection. But there's this thing called a Kuros cap. Unfortunately, I don't think it'll work, but we're trying them to teach right now, which is alcohol impregnated. And it was an interesting idea. You put it on after you've used line, now it's ready to go immediately the next time, right? So you're taking the error potential out. By the way, it's visually manageable, right? Because you can just come in and really quickly sweep and see all the ports are covered. This, by the way, is an enteric feeding tube. Does anyone know why it has this on it? Exactly right. Someone died because they got propofol PO and breast milk IV. And so someone's like, why would you ever need to hook up the enteral feeding into the IV? And someone's like, you would never need to do that. Then why do the things interlock? I mean, I understand why we have standards for interlocking, right? Because if you're in a code and something, you won't want to be figuring out which widget's going to fit into which adapter. But IV stuff are IV things and oral for oral things. So this, fortunately, we have this, and that was not in the hospital. This is a patient's journey from clinic to getting into our ORs. This literally was the state in July of 2010 when I first got it. This was the process flow. Who thinks you can get through this process flow and not have an error? It's virtually impossible. There was no way that anyone was going to get through a surgery at our organization and not have some error. The majority, fortunately, were paperwork, right? And we're only cited by the Joint Commission for not filling out the paperwork, not from doing something wrong for the patient. But we, with just some work and not all that we should have, are able to say, well, this actually is probably more what it should look like. The rest of all that stuff is unnecessary, double work, triple work, bad communication. The system evolved. No one designed it. But if you put some design thinking to it, you can get to this. Much better than this, right? And so these are all the improvement works that had to happen. And so we've been on a pretty long improvement journey at Packard, starting in the early 2000s when we formally started to do the quality improvement work, and now we're going sort of into an integrated quality management system. And you may have seen some of these houses up all over, but it's based on this notion that innovation, education, and respect for people are the foundation of our healthcare environment. And we have to acknowledge that we need perfect quality, excellent service, and we have to be affordable to be able to stay in business in order to provide extraordinary family-centered care. And so I think I have time for 2 examples. I'm going to skip past this one, except to say, yeah, we'll get them out a little bit early. But this is an example of when I was the president of the University of Michigan House Officer Association. And they said that we were taking a pay cut in 2008. There was a little bit of thing called the Great Financial Crisis. And I said, instead of giving us a pay cut, I'm going to find a way to save 2% per year for your hospital. And they're like, what? I'm like, I'm going to do it, but it's going to be value-based. I don't care about your fee-for-service based. Michigan actually had a good incentive to be value-based care. They own their own insurance company, so if they save money, they save money. Anyone recognize something like this? This is the medical ICU at Michigan. What do you think's happening? Putting in orders immediately after runs. Every machine, every computer is full in the ICU, and people are walking down the hallway to go put in their order. And the problem the residents keep saying are the reason why we can't get our stuff in on time, the reason why we can't get things done is because we don't have enough computers, right? So that's called vacuum queue system. It's the same thing with phlebotomy, right? We need a bigger analyzer so we can do 1,000 phlebotomy tubes as opposed to 500 phlebotomy tubes at the same time. But the real problem is if you map it out is what? It's the backlog in the batch. That's right. If you enter the orders as you go, you don't need a tenth the number of computers. And by the way, the patient at 7 a.m. when you rounded on, this is an eternal medicine, right? You round eternally. It's now 11. They're an ICU patient and they needed their dopamine changed, right? You're not putting the order in until 11 o'clock. This is the way it was. I know it sounds a little crazy now. Unfortunately, we don't do all that stuff here. But you enter the orders as you go. But why didn't we enter orders as we went? We didn't have the computers on wheels. That was one and the second, which was more important. There's a specific reason, and I'll just tell you. It's because the pulmonary and critical care attendants had a 12 p.m. time. And they didn't want to wait to enter orders as you went. Let's dispel that myth. It actually doesn't take that much longer to enter orders as you go. But people thought it would. But when you enter orders as you go, what we were able to see is, and then subsequently what we've been able to show, is you're able to drop ICU lengths of stay by up to 10%. You're able to get your radiology departments to start functioning at 7 o'clock in the morning as opposed to at noon when all the jam is coming in. And things become more level. And it actually has an impact because patients are getting responded to more quickly. Fortunately, in pediatrics, we didn't have too many of those old things, but this is the way it was in adult healthcare at a really prestigious place. This is one of my senseis, one of my great teachers, John Shook, who says you need to act your way to a new way of thinking, and that's what I'm challenging all of you to do. To think about this issue of having lots of waste in healthcare and saying, okay, so if I have to get an ABG, this is a bunch of process improvement work to figure out how we're going to get to an ABG. But this is the issue with the ABG. And does anyone know what's happening? Dr. Sophia, yeah, and what specifically is the issue? I know you've had it. What's the darn code to get into that room? This person can't breathe, and the residents on the adult side have to get that ABG in because the ICU does not accept the patient, and unless you die again, which is a problem in and of itself. But this issue was substantial, and then I asked the question, well, why do all these codes, why are they different? The patients don't know the code. Why can't it be the same code for all the doors? And it's because, oh, by the way, when you go into the room, like, the supplies are everywhere, right? And if you wanted to find the supply and you wanted to look it up, there's these sheets so you can try and look up what row it's in. Guess what an ABG is called? Not an ABG. You might think it's called a blood gas or a syringe or, yeah. It's called sampler, blood arterial lithium bonding. So if you wanted to look it up, that's what you'd have to look it up as in order to find it. And in 1995, the nurses were made responsible for the material supply costs for their units. And as a consequence, they changed the standardized layout of all the supply rooms so that no one could find stuff unless they were familiar with that unit. So they don't want you using their supplies on a patient on other units because that'll make the finances wrong. And they changed all the codes. I'm sorry to say I still have that problem here. It's the reason why we have different supply codes on every unit. Because the nurses are terrified that we're going to use a $300 supply from their closet for another, because they're going to be held accountable for that. It matters not to the organization in the slightest. This is an allocation issue. This is an accounting issue that is making your lives difficult. That's what I mean by systems affecting care. So this is lots of ways to potentially improve this stuff. Blah, blah, blah. So here's the old model, right? Work harder, we can always find a monkey to do your job. And my notion is that's insane. We can't work any harder. We don't need faster than 15-minute visits. We need a different way of doing things. And we should be about improving in innovative ways, right? That should be about finding ways and transforming it into value for our customers. Let me see if there's one last bit to end on, and it's this. This you may have seen. It's an old version of our discharge board on 3s. When it's working, what we would hope is that a patient, and you can tell which patients are going home today. How many are going home today? Can anyone guess? You guys can't read a single thing on this. I made it purposefully for you. 2. Why? 1, 2, 3. Right? It's pretty simple. I didn't have to teach you all. I didn't have to take you out of work and train you. It's pretty simple. You'd be able to figure out if this says target discharge date and it looks like it's green, that's the one that's probably going home today, right? And if you look at these 3 things, the red column, the yellow column, and the green column, which one of the ones are probably the problem issue? The red column. And so the issue is, if a patient's supposed to be going home today and they have a discharge time, but they still have stuff in the red column, the resource nurse should be calling the manager 40 minutes ahead of time and saying, we're not going to make this discharge time because whatever it is hasn't happened. Might be a doctor's problem, might be a nurse's problem, might be a case manager's problem, who knows the problem. But someone needs to be attending to that. And then the manager should be there on the floor and helping them resolve that issue. That's what a daily management system is about. It's about finding problems and solving them, not just in the moment, because we're all great firefighters, but then trying to figure out what's the systematic issue that caused this problem to exist that we can attack and that we can change. So my parting words to you are, this is too much stuff. So my parting words to you are this. You, when you're seeing a patient and they're wheezing, probably don't yell asthma, albuterol, and come and check on them a week later, right? That's probably do something like a physical exam. may give them a treatment and actually figure out whether it works, right? When you doctors are becoming the boss doctors, and you're seeing problems happen around you in your clinic, I'm not saying you have to solve them all. What I'm saying is you have to try to engage the team together and say, we've got to together solve this problem. And we've got to diagnose it. We've got to figure out the root cause of it. We've got to get some labs on it, and we've got to figure out what some measures are. So that we know if the problem comes back and if we're treating it appropriately. That's it. Use the same skills you are as doctoring towards the problems we're taking care of. And don't try to take care of all of them at the same time. Pick one every couple months. And maybe, just maybe, what happened to my mom in this past couple of weeks, or what maybe has happened to some of your loved ones with the patients you've taken care of, we can avoid and have a more responsive system. So I'm very sorry that I went a little bit longer than I had hoped. It is a pleasure talking with any of you. If you want to talk offline, talk about problems, if you need the performance improvement person to think about what it is that you want to work on, we can see if the lines of the hospital go with I'm available for any questions, but you don't have to. Thank you. I know it's sad, isn't it?